Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good. This is part 2 of my conversation with Robert Glazer, a best-selling author and thought leader who just released his latest book, A Compass Within, and is already sparking conversations around values-based leadership. In this episode, we go beyond the basics of core values and explore how they serve your personal GPS, guiding your biggest decisions, relationships, and professional growth. Robert also breaks down how to distinguish between aspirational values and the ones that truly define who you are, and why getting that right is crucial for making aligned, sustainable choices. So if you're ready to reconnect with what really matters, stay tuned. This episode's packed with practical tools and powerful reflections. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. There's also this misalignment, right? So once you've identified those on your core values and how you live, how can you identify some signs that people can look for when they're off course? And maybe what steps can they take to realign themselves?
Yeah. So I think that we feel when our core values aren't aligned. And in fact, like the opposite test is a good thing because when a core value feels violated, like if I'm doing this work with you, Charles, and there's a core value of like gratitude and whatever it is. And so I'll test that by giving you an antithesis sort of kryptonite. It's like, Charles, you're at a party and someone comes up to you and they start talking about their trust fund and how this isn't going well. And then and you'll just like tense up and be like, oh, this is like, this I have to get away from this because they physically could violate your core values. It's a really fun exercise where I just invent the opposite sort of character and then present it, and the facial they tightens up. So we kind of know these things. If you don't have the words to do it, it might not be like, oh, why does this person drive me nuts? Well, they're just so. For example, like I am someone who's has a core value of long-term orientation, and so I struggle with there's negative versions of this, right? There's people who are manipulating and trying to take advantage of the short term scheme or whatever. But there's also just like I see people, making a lot of decisions or just doing things without any thinking of the consequences of what's going to happen in the long term, right? And so I can sort of identify, oh, like that could be sort of a problem. But just imagine like you're in a town and you're really focused on health and well-being, and you have this group of friends and you've been with them for a while, and they want to go out to drink 4 nights a week and you don't want to drink. Well, going to that bar 4 nights a week and thinking you're not going to drink, that is not putting yourself in the right environment, right? So you need some friends who are in a hiking club, or you need to kind of do something different. Now, if the whole town's like that, then that's a different story. And I think this is why we might not imagine that person who has the, include all perspectives. Well, there's some towns where they're very centrist and ideas are open and respected. And there's some towns that are really politically toxic. It's like you're on team A or team B. And this is kind of alluded to in the book. Like that just may be a really bad community for someone to be in who likes hearing perspectives and doesn't like, oh, you're on our team or their team. It's just not going to feel good. So it, your radar kind of always goes off, or they feel hard, they feel uncomfortable, like you want to get out of it. The key is if you don't have the language to know what, like why, and you can label it like, oh, this, like I'm really like I'm a health and I have a health and vitality core value. Like that's really important to me. Like, so I don't want to be in pockets or groups where, particularly at this point in my life, where people are, there's some ironic, they're at a conference all day about being better, and then they're having 9 drinks until 4 a.m. in the morning. And I'm like, that's not my version of health and vitality.
Well, and for me, yeah, signs of misalignment include for me like being burnt out, unfulfilled, or like you said, just kind of going through the motions,
Yeah.
right? And I feel, frustrated or anxious, because probably there's that disconnect. And from reading your book and identifying core values or going through this process, for me, the first step was to that realignment was self-reflection, identifying where that disconnect is occurring. Because like you said, many people can't really put their finger on it, even though something just feels not right.
There's a moment in the book when Jamie actually, like, nails them down, and I think a lot of people have, and he starts having this epiphany, and I had some moments like this in my life where you start it's like you have this list, and then you're watching this highlight reel or low light reel in your head, and you're like, makes sense, like, that relationship didn't work out. I was talking to someone recently, and they'd figured out their core values, and they were in the process of a breakup, and they were like, my partner was like the antithesis of three of these core values, right? And I actually think it helped them. They were really struggling from this breakup, but it really helped them to have some peace that was like a irreconcilable problem. That was not going to get better, right? I love to ski, you don't love to ski, like, that's reconcilable, right, in some ways, but I just think these core value gulfs are not, and where I tell a personal story at the end, but my other experience around this is that where you find fissures and you ignore them, soon you will have craters around relationships or otherwise, and so every time I've sort of been like, "Spidey sense is going off that this is a problem, but I'm just gonna" it just comes back, with a vengeance. Probably with people on your teams over the years, right? Where you're like, and then you convince yourself it's gonna be fine because it's gonna be hard, and then if whenever it does blow up and you have inherently those core value differences, it's gonna be messier by default, right? Because you don't believe in the same thing.
I see that in my kids and I see that in my friends that say, I'm going to love them for the person that I'm going to change them to be, right? Never works that way.
You said that before because I was just seeing some that was on a sitcom or a joke someone said, you marry someone and then you think you're gonna change them, and then those are all the worst and this is why I said people can change. What causes people to change? Like a deep personal commitment that they need to do something different, they need to change, or something happens, right? It's formative early, or they get a health scare, they do something, but that's never going to come from an external source. It's only going to come from an internal. So yes, people can change, but it's so hard that you should bank on them not.
Well, you mentioned that core values need to be specific, actionable, and measurable, and to avoid one word core values because they're too open to interpretation or multiple interpretations.
Look, there's a lot of things that I sort of list, but the most important thing a core value can do for you is sort of help you make decisions, right? So I have a couple rules about core values. So it's got to be a constant, non-negotiable principle, a distinct kind of definition and a point of view. I think a 2 or 5 word phrase works really well. And then, while I'm not good at grammar, I've been told adjective and noun or adverb and verb. And that's the difference when you hear something like family or honesty or integrity. Like, I need to be able to know, like a report card. Did I do this well last month? Like, did I do integrity well last month? Did I do faith well last month? Like, I think that's really it's hard. So the well-worded ones I mentioned before, I really like include all perspectives or always get better, or it's something that has that sort of definite. It's not for everyone, right? Not everyone should be able to say it. So I have some unique ones, but they're really uniquely me. Like, respectful authenticity is a core orientation for me. Like, I am direct. I'm often the person who tells people things that they don't want to hear, but in a respectful way. Like, people call people have their friends that they call to tell them exactly what they want to hear. Like, people know that I will tell them, but I also deeply believe in respect and being respectful. In fact, when my kids are not respectful, like, that's about the maddest I'd ever get. I try to talk to my kids in the terms of my values and their values. Like, hey, the fourth cookie, that's not just some arbitrary rule we have in our family. Like, that's just not healthy. Like, we talk about being healthy, and that's not healthy. I had a great story I loved in the book about a curfew, a daughter and his curfew, which was she asked what her curfew was for prom, and it would normally he would have been like, all right, 12:30, it's a late night, or one, maybe he's going to say 1 o'clock, right, for prom night. He's like, look, it's not an arbitrary rule. Your mom and I, we go to bed early, and he's got some health issue or whatever it is, and we're just not going to sleep really well. People are driving around. We want to know you're home. So really, it's about us, like, getting a good night's sleep. And so whatever you think is reasonable. And she said 12 o'clock, and he was going to say 1 o'clock. So if they started fighting about the rules, right? Rules are arbitrary. But when he kind of explained the value behind it, then he kind of brought her into it, and there was a better outcome. I always loved that story.
That's a great approach to making those core values more actionable. And the topic of clarity, you recommend that individuals really just need to focus on 3 to 4 core values. Why do you think having too many core values can dilute their impact, and how can people prioritize them?
Well, this I'd flip to an organization. So, how many times does an organization have 10 goals for the year and anyone can tell you what they are, right? And they get one or two of them done and they're not the right ones. Or someone's like, "We have great core values." The thing that people fall for, I was giving this advice to a hospital system last week. They come up with these mnemonics for core values. And people remember the catchy phrase, but they have no idea what the actual words are under it. They just remember it stood for heart or whatever it was, and they and then it was humility and whatever it is. So, I think when a company has 3 or 4 values, like everyone who's been at our company for more than 30 days knows that our core values are own it, embrace relationships, and excel and improve because they hear them, they see call outs, they hear about the awards, all that stuff. I've seen presentations on core values, like we have great core values, and they pull out their laminated sheet and they read them. Like you have to remember them, and you have in order to access them. So similarly, I think if you're going to remember them, unless you're going to carry that card around with you all day long, I think 3 to 4 is sort of better. Even I have 5, and I'm always sometimes like, oh, what's that fifth one? I think 3 to 4 is better. There's some magic rule around 3 that I found with a lot of things. 3 goals, 3 whatever.
Well, you've also emphasized, and I wanted to get back to that because this is a hard distinction for a lot of people. You emphasize that core values are not just aspirational, but intrinsic qualities that guide our actions. But it's still hard for someone to distinguish between those aspirational values and those that really truly reflect who they are at their core.
Yeah, well, the questions in the book and the process of determining this are based on like behavioral based questions, right? It almost would be like an interview with everyone. That if you could bring everyone that knew you really well in a room and be interested, if we kept you over here and did the process with you, and then did it with like, tell us what Charles like really good at and not good at, and all that stuff. So this is why it sort of clicks because you've been doing this stuff for a long time, right? There's been things that you go do for hours and don't get paid and they're easy, and then there's stuff that is so hard and you fight against it and it's miserable and you don't want to do it. So like organizations, you can't if you pick something that's aspirational and that's not who you are, it fails this whole test of helping you in that way and helping you as a decision making rubric. So it's hard for people to do because I think they're too worried about the marketing and too like if you're dubious and skeptical, like, and that's a value of yours, like own that. Like it, it's not, you're too worried about how that might look. You're like, look, my job is to be dubious and skeptical. Like I've been that way since I was born, and there's a reason why it happened and whatever. There's actually like you should go in quality control or do something where like it's your job to prove that it's not working and not to be the cheerleader for it. There is an alignment for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And those aspirational values are those, like you said, those traits that we hope to embody, but they may not reflect our true selves. And we have to kind of cut through that. You also, which we talked about in our last interview, but I wanted to bring it up here because I think it fits with the values piece too, is that you explain how understanding our past wounds can reveal a lot about our greatest gifts because you are the best person to deal with the person you used to be or have issues with. So can you explain how this connection between your past pain and present values can lead to really greater personal fulfillment and career success?
Yeah, again, without becoming an amateur psychologist, I think a lot of psychology is on the right path with a lot of the stuff. But then I think there has been well, how do we go back and blame? And that's just not, we all have these experiences and they shape us and they impact us in formative ways. And people couldn't understand that. And we just need to honor that and understand that this is who we are. Like, I'm really independent because I had to be, because my parents were out working 2 jobs and putting me through school. I have sort of there's part of the storyline in the book where he's telling the story about this person who had a single parent, who was never around and worked 3 jobs and put them to school, and they went to Harvard and they became, really successful. And they started like an award-winning, like after daycare school company. And look, that parent did everything that they could as a single parent. They were a great parent, but they weren't around a lot. And the kid was lonely. So the loneliness drove them as a purpose. Purpose lies pretty close to pain for a lot of people. So look, true for me, like a lot of my overachievement is because I grossly was labeled like an underachiever early in life. And so not only did I like fix that for myself. I spent a lot of time trying to help other people live up to their potential because I think it's the worst feeling in the world to be told that you didn't do that. And I think it is, if you talk to people, and the first question in my podcast is like, tell me about your childhood and what did you like and what were you into and whatever. And whatever their answers are so correlated to what it is that they do today. So there's power in that, right? And a lot of good comes from it, but you have to understand why and what it was, because sometimes it's too much good can be bad, right? And you can over index and not realize your Achilles heel around that. That person who was never alone may be so afraid to be alone that they now over indulge themselves in relationships and conversations and just don't ever have a little peace and quiet time, that they need.
So, starting the process of self discovery really starts with self reflection, right? Ask yourself big questions like what has brought you joy and fulfillment in your life? What values were behind those moments? And then from there, right, use the feedback from people you know well and be patient with the process because core values, which I think people get wrong, aren't something you invent, they're something that you discover.
Yeah, and so, we talk about the 5 questions or the 6 questions in the book, depending on how a few are big ones, like, what professional situations are you highly engaged in? What are the qualities of people you struggle with the most? A big one, an exercise I've done, if you ask, like, what would you want be said about your eulogy about you? That very quickly identifies the qualities that you sort of figure out are most important. In fact, the first time I did that exercise, the words I used ended up being my why and several of my core values. Like it tends to just kind of get you down to that thing. So we're trying to figure out these characteristics. There was an exercise someone did years ago, like name 6 people and why you like them, right? And famous people. And you did it, and it was like those were the things that were most what you liked about them was the things you most thought were important, for yourself, and you were sort of drawn to that. So I thought that was an interesting exercise.
Well, yeah, those 6 questions takes a lot of the guesswork out of it because you've carefully curated those to really kind of get you started down that process of self-discovery.
And these inverses and these negatives about what really those are very telling. Like you have to kind of match up the negatives with the positives, but to me, like that's as I said before, the sort of true test of a value is if when you describe the opposite and someone makes that squirming face, right, or makes that sort of kryptonite face, like yeah. Again, they include all perspectives person. If we figured that out, I'd be like, all right, how do you feel when someone comes in the room, doesn't ask anyone questions, just says, this is how it is. Like, I don't want to hear from you. They're like, oh, that's like it's my kryptonite, right? Like it's just, so it's an interesting, the process like comes at it from both ways. Kind of what are the things that are bothering you? What are you good at? And then you kind of see they meet in the middle.
Well, and then once you've identified those answers, you look for keywords that are common across multiple questions, and then you try to identify kind of themes that those keywords are. And you say one of the most common mistakes people make when undergoing this process is they concentrate too much on identifying that perfect keyword or that label versus trying to get the theme that resonates deeply for them.
Yeah, I talk about this thing called the core validator in the book, and it has this 2 components, the right theme and the right phrase. So people like here include all perspectives and they're like, I like that, and so they kind of get focused on the word, but it's like climbing the mountain before you have the right mountain. So the right theme is about, can you use it to make a decision past or present? Like is that theme, and when you imagine the opposite, does it strike a nerve? So that kind of tells you if you're on the right without the wording. And then the wording is trying to just make it like accessible to you. So is it a phrase rather than a word? And could you objectively rate yourself on how it's worded? Like I was speaking to a company a few weeks ago and they, one of the things like they have these core values like celebrate diversity. And I was like, you're never going to sit down in a performance review with Charles and say like, Charles, yesterday in that meeting, you did not celebrate diversity, very well. Like you're laughing as I people can't see this, but so I was like, look, what you probably wanted was something more like include all perspectives or, make everyone feel welcome, because that's something it's universal and it applies in all like areas of these core values should apply in the workplace, outside the workplace. It's why I don't think family is a core value. I think family is a priority. I think there's probably a core value to how you treat your family and how you treat people in the work. And it's the same, which is you listen to them, you prioritize them or something else. But yeah, I think you got to make sure you're on the right path first, and then you can get that title that kind of nails it for you.
Oh, and I love that second pass, that core validation, just to further clarify what those are. And then you said the next phase is really around just road testing them, because the first draft of your core values will need to be road tested. Test them out in your life, see how they fare, see how they make you feel, and then they can always be adjusted over time. But it's essential to start making progress on these, but they may not be the final ones that you end with over a period of time when you're done with the process.
Write your first cut down on a piece of paper after you do this stuff, and you can read the book or the course or look around if you want to find more detail. So put them on a post-it note or on your desk, and next time there's a decision or a great situation or bad, like look over and you're like, oh, that, or actually what was really bothering me was something different, so I actually think it's this. And then eventually you'll be like, this is a good rubric, like this is guiding me to how I should do things and what I should do. And it's being really clear on what I shouldn't do. I sometimes when people are like, I think this is my final list, I'm like, tell me, like, how would a job that let you do this, 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 and this sound? They're like, great. Like that's the stuff. And how would a job where you couldn't do this? Then they'd be like, oh, I think this is the real difference with my version of core values versus some of the others. Like you're really trying to be able to look at these and use them for some of these hard situations and how you solve problems in life and leadership.
Well, and in my experience talking to leaders, it's really hard to make that distinction because they want to put forth the values that they think other people will value in them as a aspirational good leader versus what's really core to who they are. How do you get leaders really to kind of separate the two, to say, okay, I know this is what you've been told. I know this is the person you want to be or embody, but what I'm looking for is more core values to who you are. And if you do this, it's going to be a better overall result and product in the long run.
I think people want to be who they are. I think to the extent that a leader is not willing to be vulnerable or realize where they've made mistakes, that doesn't have the ingredient of a great leader. So most people I know who are great leaders, with this discovery, they'd be like, oh, like I got to go make some changes based on this. Like I don't want to be who people think I am. I want to be who I like. Who wants to do that? So maybe in those cases, one of those people value like shallowness, like I don't know, or they value like performativeness, and maybe that is actually something that they value that would be a pretty bad quality in leadership. But I think people are pretty excited to feel like particularly organizations. Some organizations get confused when they talk to me about well why would talk to our team about this and like look like they, they are going to forever connect this to you. Like if they if they do this work and they are a better leader and a better parent, and you give them permission, you say, look, I want you to show up as yourself and be who you are. That's a super powerful message for an organization to send to its employees and its leaders.
As we close, for anyone who is trying to rediscover or reconnect with their core values, what is some practical advice you would offer them to get started? Like, what's that first step in that journey of self discovery?
Yeah, I would just get started. Get these questions, answer the 6 questions, write them down. You can do that in, 20, 30 minutes. Again, I have a course that'll take you through all of it, but just do that. And I think it will provide I think you'll be surprised when you start to look at the themes, because the questions are designed to ask you stuff from different aspects of your life. And what you will see is that the answers all have very similar themes. And so I think that's when people start to go, oh, now now I see why did that job not work out? Why did that relationship not work out? They're kind of the same, a little bit of that piece, the person I was telling you about before who went through the breakup, when was like, God, my partner was like anti 3 of my core values. Like, of course it wasn't going to work. And then I think people are pretty motivated to continue the work once they start to see some of that.
Well, thank you again, Robert, for this enlightening conversation on core values and their transformative power in our personal and professional lives. Remind our listeners how they can connect with you, learn more about your work, and get your new book.
Sure. Thanks, Charles. The Compass Within is on sale wherever you buy your books this week. And if you go to my website, robertglazer.com, I've got plenty of stuff on there around core values, the 6 questions, and the course is on there too. And it's a reference in the book. Everything you would need in the book is to do the same process. If you want a little more guidance and email each week that prompts you and gives you an exercise. That's where the course is, but you can get all the same information in the book. And hopefully, again, that story prompts you to think of maybe some of these places in your life that you've been either questioning in a positive way or a negative way, and kind of give you some reinforcement around that.
Great. Well, thank you again. And thank you to all of you. I encourage you to take Robert's advice to heart. Start the journey of discovering your own core values and see how they can guide you toward a more authentic, fulfilling life. And be sure to check out Robert's new book, A Compass Within, for a deeper dive into the process of core value discovery. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.